Welcome everyone to this custom-tailored deep dive. We're thrilled to have you sitting right here with us as we embark on today's mission.
Absolutely.
Because we are taking a really extensive, multi-perspective look at the harmonized accounts of the death, burial, and immediate post-death activity of Jesus Christ, exactly as they're recorded across the four Gospels. We have a massive stack of material today.
Huge stack. Theological analyses, historical documents, linguistic studies.
Right, and comprehensive notes. Our goal here is to weave all these threads together, harmonizing these profound accounts to extract the ultimate nuggets of historical and spiritual insight for you.
And the scope of this is just monumental. What makes this particular exploration so compelling is the framework we're dealing with. We aren't just reading a single flat historical timeline. We're looking at the crucifixion through a stereoscopic view.
Stereoscopic, I like that.
Yeah, the four gospel writers provide four distinct lenses. Each had a specific audience and a specific theological portrait they were painting. When those accounts are laid over one another, the image of these events becomes incredibly rich, textured, and three-dimensional.
I want to make sure we set that foundation properly before we actually get into the timeline. For you, the listener, trying to keep track of these different perspectives, how should we understand those four distinct lenses?
Think of it as four different portrait artists painting the exact same subject from four different angles. First, we have Matthew. His gospel was written primarily to a Jewish audience, and his primary lens focuses on Jesus as the king.
The king, got it.
Right. So whenever we look through Matthew's account, we are going to see a massive emphasis on sovereignty, the fulfillment of ancient messianic prophecy, and these big cosmic signs. Matthew wants to show the death of royalty.
So Matthew gives us the royal perspective. What about Mark?
Mark's gospel was largely directed at a Roman audience, and he presents Jesus as the servant.
Okay, the servant.
And Mark's account is famously fast-paced, it's stark, it's visceral. Through his lens, the focus is on raw suffering, endurance, and the ultimate ransom paid by the suffering servant. There's very little philosophical preamble in Mark. It's just action and endurance.
That makes total sense for a Roman audience that really valued action and strength.
Yeah.
Then we move to Luke. And he was a physician, right? A careful historian writing to a broader Greek audience.
He was, yeah. And Luke sees Jesus as the ultimate man or the perfect man. His lens highlights deep human compassion, flawless innocence, and absolute human trust in the divine. Luke is essentially presenting the ideal representative of humanity facing the ultimate trial.
Wow. And finally, we have John.
Right. John was writing later, and his lens sees Jesus explicitly as God, the divine word made flesh. Through John's perspective, we don't see a helpless victim. We see a sovereign divine son who is in meticulous control of his own destiny, actively laying down his life on his own terms.
King, servant, ultimate man, and God. It's like looking at a brilliantly cut diamond from four different angles. Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to transition right into the timeline of Friday. We want you to step with us into the historical and spiritual weight of Golgotha. The setting is the 6th hour.
Which in the Roman and Jewish reckoning of the time means it is exactly noon.
Exactly noon, right? Jesus has already been on the cross for 3 hours, having been crucified at the 3rd hour, or 9 a.m. But at noon, something completely unprecedented happens. The sky goes pitch black.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record this identical, terrifying phenomenon. From the 6th hour to the 9th hour, so from noon to 3 p.m., a supernatural darkness falls over the entire land. And the historical records make something very clear right away.
This wasn't just a bad storm.
No, and it was not a solar eclipse either. Passover always occurs during a full moon, making a solar eclipse astronomically impossible. The text is presenting an extraordinary supernatural act.
So, if it's not a weather event or an eclipse, what is the significance? Luke, writing as the careful historian, notes that the sun's light just failed. What's the prophetic or theological background to this darkness?
The Hebrew scriptures are full of precedents for this. It connects directly to the prophet Amos, chapter 8, verse 9, where the text states, "I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight."
Broad daylight. Got it.
Furthermore, it immediately invokes the cultural memory of the 9th plague of Egypt in Exodus 10.
Oh, the thick darkness.
That thick darkness that could literally be felt. In the biblical framework, darkness of this magnitude consistently represents divine judgment. It symbolizes the oppressive weight of human sin and the withdrawal of divine favor.
So, viewing this through Matthew's kingly perspective, how does that shift the meaning of the darkness?
Through Matthew's lens, we are witnessing creation itself protesting the injustice happening to its creator. The king of creation is dying, and nature responds by going into mourning. The theological claim here is that this darkness is a visual, atmospheric manifestation of a spiritual reality. The judgment against human sin is falling upon Christ at that exact moment.
Put yourself in the shoes of someone standing in that crowd. You've perhaps been mocking this man, shouting with the mob, and suddenly, at the brightest part of the day, a suffocating 3-hour darkness descends. The absolute terror that must have fallen over Golgotha is hard to fathom.
It would have been paralyzing.
And it's at the end of this 3-hour darkness at 3 p.m. that Jesus cries out and breathes his last. And the moment he does, the physical world reacts again, violently.
Yes. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all document the tearing of the temple veil. Matthew 27:51 states, "And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom." To grasp the magnitude of this, we really have to look at the physical reality of Herod's temple.
Okay, lay it out for us.
According to Jewish tradition and historical accounts like the Talmud, this wasn't a flimsy piece of fabric. This veil was approximately 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, and intricately woven to be incredibly thick.
How thick are we talking?
Often described as being as thick as a man's hand.
Let me stop you right there. A woven curtain as thick as a human hand. You couldn't just walk up and rip that, even if you had a team of horses pulling on it. And the text specifically notes it tore from top to bottom. That detail seems pretty vital.
The top-to-bottom detail is the textual indicator that this was not human vandalism. It was a divine act initiated from above. The theological impact of this barrier being destroyed is central to the entire New Testament message. This veil separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, which was considered the very dwelling place of the Shekinah glory of God on earth.
And for centuries, this massive barrier stood between humanity and the unmediated presence of the divine. Under the Old Covenant system, only the high priest could go behind that veil, right?
Exactly.
And only once a year.
Yes. On the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, the high priest would enter with the blood of a sacrifice. When that veil tears at the exact moment of Christ's death, the author of Hebrews in chapter 10 interprets this for us. The barrier is entirely destroyed. Access to the divine presence is now wide open.
And looking through Luke's lens, the perfect man, the narrative suggests that this ultimate man sacrifice has successfully mediated a new covenant, allowing direct access to the Father for humanity.
Which is a massive paradigm shift.
It is. Now, the ripping of the veil is a profound internal sign within the Jewish religious structure. But Matthew records an external geological sign as well. Remember, Matthew is using the lens of the king. He tells us in chapter 27 that the earth shook and the rocks were split. This is the first earthquake in the narrative.
And Matthew is the only gospel writer to record this specific seismic event. In biblical literature, earthquakes frequently mark major divine interventions. The giving of the law at Mount Sinai in Exodus 19 was accompanied by an earthquake. Prophetic literature, like Psalm 18, uses the earth shaking to describe God's response to the cry of the afflicted.
What about Haggai?
Right. Haggai 2, 6-7 contains a prominent prophecy stating that God would shake the heavens and the earth, and the desire of all nations shall come.
So the theological consensus here is that this earthquake signifies the literal physical shattering of the old covenant order.
That is the primary interpretation. It serves as a royal cosmic sign. The tree king dies, and the earth physically shudders in response to the monumental shift in the spiritual realm.
All of this cosmic and geological upheaval brings us to an incredibly moving, ground-level moment at the foot of the cross. The reaction of the Roman centurion. Think about this guy. This man is a hardened military executioner. He has likely overseen hundreds of crucifixions.
He knows exactly what death looks like.
Right. He's seen men die, cursing, crying, begging, gasping. But he sees the darkness, feels the earthquake, and hears the unique way Jesus cries out. How does this Roman soldier react?
The reaction varies slightly depending on which gospel lens we look through, but both reveal a profound shift. In Mark 15:39, the lens of the servant, this Gentile soldier observes how Jesus breathed his last and declares, "Truly this man was the Son of God."
Wow.
He recognizes something deeply transcendent, a divine identity, through the very way the suffering servant endured the cross.
And what about Luke's lens?
In Luke 23:47, the lens of the ultimate man, the centurion glorifies God and says, "Certainly this was a righteous man," which can also be translated as an innocent man. Here, the soldier recognizes the moral perfection and complete innocence of the human Jesus.
The implications of a Roman centurion making this declaration seem huge for the trajectory of the early Christian movement.
The narrative placement is absolutely crucial. This centurion represents the broader Gentile world. Before the message of the cross has even left the hill of Golgotha, before the resurrection has even occurred, a Roman executioner is the first person to publicly vocalize the truth of the event. It acts as a narrative foreshadowing.
That the reach of this redemptive work isn't going to be confined to the borders of Israel.
Exactly. It is destined to reach the entire global Gentile world.
It's staggering when you lay out the sequence. The cosmos protests, the temple veil rips, the ground shakes, and the executioner believes. But to truly grasp the depth of what was happening during those 6 hours on the cross, we need to focus on what Jesus actually said. The historical texts provide us with what is commonly known as the 7 last words of Christ.
The 7 last words are actually 7 distinct statements compiled from across all 4 Gospels. No single Gospel writer records all 7.
Right, you have to harmonize them.
Exactly. But when they are harmonized, biblical scholars note that they form a complete 7-fold testimony. In ancient biblical numerology, the number 7 signifies divine completion and perfection. Therefore, these 7 statements are viewed as representing the complete and perfect work of redemption, expressed verbally. They basically function as a theological symphony.
We really need to take these one by one because the historical, prophetic, and linguistic depth of each statement is immense. Let's start with the first word, found in Luke 23:34. Jesus is being crucified. The soldiers are actively casting lots for his garments. And he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
The linguistic details here are striking. If we look at the original Greek text, the verb used for forgive is aphiemi. Furthermore, it's formulated in the present imperative tense, which indicates a continuous, ongoing action.
So he wasn't just saying it once as a blanket statement.
No. The grammar suggests he was repeatedly saying it. As they were driving the nails, as they were hoisting the crossbar, as they were mopping him, he kept repeating, "Father, keep on forgiving them or begin the process of forgiving them."
That is heavy.
The theological implication is that he initiates grace before the offenders even recognize their crime. Before there is any repentance, the offer of forgiveness is already being extended.
The prophetic connection here is also very direct. Isaiah 53, written 7 centuries earlier, predicted that the suffering servant would make intercession for the transgressors. Looking at this through Luke's lens of the ultimate man, it showcases a radical, almost unthinkable level of human compassion. He is using his agonizingly limited breath to pray for his murderers.
Which perfectly transitions into the second word, also recorded in Luke's Gospel, chapter 23, verse 43. This is the famous interaction with the repentant thief hanging on the cross next to him. Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise."
This scene is fascinating. You have these 2 criminals crucified on either side of Jesus. Initially, Matthew's account tells us that both of them were hurling insults at him. But as the hours drag on, one of them undergoes a complete psychological and spiritual shift.
He watches Jesus.
He hears that prayer of forgiveness. He rebukes the other criminal, admits his own guilt, declares Jesus to be innocent, and then makes this astonishing plea, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom."
What's fascinating here is the theological precision of that dying thief's confession. It is frequently highlighted by scholars as one of the greatest acts of faith in the biblical record. Consider the context. He is looking at a man who is covered in blood, dying in ultimate disgrace, entirely defeated in the eyes of the world. Yet the thief makes a messianic appeal.
He sees the king.
He declares faith in a future kingdom and, implicitly, a resurrection, while both of them are minutes away from death.
And Jesus' response is immediate and definitive. "Today, you will be with me in paradise." We hear the word paradise thrown around a lot today, usually referring to a tropical beach. But what did that word mean in the first century Jewish context?
The Greek word used is paradisos. It is actually a Persian loanword that originally referred to a walled royal garden or a king's private park. More significantly for the Jewish listener, this was the exact word utilized in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, to translate the Garden of Eden. By using this specific word, Jesus is promising this dying thief an immediate restoration to Edenic fellowship with God.
The timeline Jesus gives is also striking. He says today, the Greek word semeron.
That is a crucial theological point. He doesn't tell the thief that he will enter paradise after a long period of purgation or at the end of the age when the world is remade. He says today.
For you, the listener, the historical and theological application of this moment is profound. The early church viewed this interaction as the ultimate proof against performance-based religion. This thief had no time to perform good works.
He couldn't go to the synagogue.
He couldn't be baptized. He couldn't give to the poor. He had absolutely nothing to offer but a dying breath of faith. Through Matthew's kingly lens, we see Jesus possessing the absolute sovereign authority to grant immediate citizenship into his kingdom based purely on that faith.
Moving to the third word, we shift to the lens of John. In John 19:26 and 27, Jesus looks down from the cross and sees his mother, Mary, standing next to the disciple whom he loved, which is understood to be John himself. He says to his mother, "Woman, behold your son," and to the disciple, "Behold your mother."
The physical reality of crucifixion involved severe asphyxiation. Speaking required pushing up on pierced feet to draw enough breath into the lungs. Yet even in that absolute agony, Jesus is focused on managing his earthly responsibilities. He is ensuring that his mother, who historical consensus suggests was a widow at this point, is socially and financially cared for.
While the familial care is beautiful, John's Gospel, the lens of the divine Son, highlights a deeper theological layer. Notice how Jesus addresses her. He calls her woman, which in Greek is gyne.
It sounds a bit harsh to modern English ears. Why didn't he say mother?
In the ancient Near Eastern context, it wasn't a disrespectful term. It was akin to saying madam. However, it does intentionally establish a relational distance. Throughout John's Gospel, Jesus' earthly, biological family relationships are consistently shown to be transcended by his divine redemptive mission. By reassigning Mary to John and John to Mary, the divine Son is essentially establishing the church as a new family unit.
So creating a community not based on blood.
The theological claim is that he is creating a new community bound not by biological bloodlines, but by the spiritual bond of the cross.
That brings a completely new dimension to the idea of the church family. From that moment of tender provision, the narrative shifts drastically into the deepest, darkest moment of the crucifixion. The fourth word. We are now at the 9th hour, 3 p.m. This is the climax of the 3 hours of supernatural darkness. Matthew 27:46 and Mark 15:34 record this raw, visceral Aramaic cry, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which translates to, my God, why have you forsaken me?
This statement stands out from the others in a terrifying way. It is the only one of the 7 words addressed not to humans and not to Father, but to God in a judicial sense. The theological framework here insists that the separation is not merely psychological or metaphorical, it is actual.
But wait, if we are looking through John's lens of Jesus as God, or the standard Christian doctrine of the Trinity, how can God be separated from God? Is he losing his faith in this moment?
That is the central paradox of the cross. The concept we need to unpack here is called penal substitution. In Christian theology, this means that Jesus is acting as a substitute, taking the penalty of human sin upon himself. The Apostle Paul later writes in 2 Corinthians 5:21 that God made him to be sin who knew no sin. As the king and the servant, Jesus is bearing the full judicial weight of human rebellion.
Taking the penalty.
Because God is infinitely holy, he cannot look upon sin. In this singular, incomprehensible moment, the incarnate Son experiences the ultimate agonizing separation from the Father. The judicial wrath against sin is poured out, and Jesus absorbs it completely.
The prophetic reality of this cry is also undeniable. When he shouts, my God, why have you forsaken me? He is quoting Psalm 22, verse 1, verbatim.
He is. Psalm 22 was written by King David roughly 1,000 years before this event, centuries before the Carthaginians or the Romans even invented the practice of crucifixion. The original Hebrew word used for crying out in the opening of that psalm is shaga, which literally refers to the roar of a lion in agony. It is a primal, guttural scream.
So he isn't just reciting scripture to pass the time. He is making a very specific claim.
Exactly. By opening Psalm 22 on his lips, Jesus is acting as a prophetic signpost. He is telling any Jewish person present with ears to hear, I am actively fulfilling Psalm 22 right now. If you read through that ancient psalm, it graphically describes pierced hands and feet, people dividing garments by casting lots, and crowds mocking the sufferer. Yet, crucially, the psalm ends in total victory and universal worship. The cry of dereliction is both a genuine expression of spiritual agony and a declaration of messianic identity.
For the early Christians and for believers today, the application of this fourth word is central to their comfort. The theological takeaway is that Jesus endured this ultimate, crushing separation from God so that humanity wouldn't have to. He took the forsakenness so that the promise, I will never leave you nor forsake you, could be offered to you.
Following that intense spiritual agony, the physical reality of the crucifixion comes rushing back to the forefront. This brings us to the fifth word. John 19:28 records. After this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst.
The physiological reality of crucifixion was horrific. Modern medical analyses of the practice explain that the severe blood loss, the exposure to the elements, and the massive trauma produced a state of profound shock and an unbearable burning dehydration. John, who usually emphasizes Jesus as the divine word, specifically highlights this moment of intense human frailty. Why?
To combat early heresies that claimed Jesus only appeared to be human, John is proving that the divine word truly became flesh. He experienced the full, agonizing physiological reality of human suffering. The thirst was real. The pain was real.
And John explicitly mentions that he said this to fulfill Scripture. This points us to Psalm 69:21, which says, "For my thirst they gave me sour wine to drink." And what happens next in the historical account? The Roman soldiers offer him sour wine on a sponge, but John adds a very specific botanical detail. They put the sponge on a branch of hyssop.
The inclusion of the hyssop branch introduces us to a concept called biblical typology. Typology is when a historical event, person, or object in the Old Testament serves as a prophetic symbol or foreshadowing a type of a future reality found in Christ.
So how does the hyssop branch function as a type here? Why does the specific plant matter?
We have to go back to Exodus 12, during the very first Passover in Egypt. God instructed the enslaved Israelites to slaughter a spotless lamb and apply its blood to the doorposts of their houses. This would cause the angel of death to pass over them. The specific tool God commanded them to use to apply that saving blood was a bunch of hyssop.
I see.
Here, at the climax of the narrative, the ultimate Passover lamb is offered the sour wine on a hyssop branch. The theological symbolism is staggering. It visually connects the sacrifice on the cross directly to the ancient deliverance from slavery in Egypt.
That intricate connection is just brilliant. And after receiving that moisture from the sour wine, Jesus summons the strength for the sixth word. Found in John 19:30, it is translated in English as, "It is finished." But in the original Greek manuscript, it is a single, earth-shattering word, tetelestai.
Tetelestai. It is arguably the most theologically loaded utterance in the biblical record. In the first century, this was a common commercial and accounting term. Archaeologists have found ancient tax receipts and bills of sale written on papyri with the word tetelestai stamped across them. It literally means paid in full.
So he isn't saying I am finished as in I am defeated and dying.
Not at all. Grammatically, the word is in the perfect passive indicative tense. In Greek, this tense describes a completed action that has ongoing, permanent results into the future. It means the mission is accomplished, the debt of human sin has been fully, perfectly paid, and the results of that payment echo forward into eternity.
Think about the psychological impact of that single word. The early church viewed tetelestai as the ultimate antidote to religious anxiety. Throughout history, so many people have lived as though God requires them to constantly earn their salvation, as if Jesus said, "It is mostly finished, now you have to work to complete the rest." But the theological claim of the sixth word is that the redemptive work is done. It cannot be added to. It simply must be received.
And having definitively completed the mission, Jesus speaks the seventh and final word. Luke 23:46 tells us, "Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, 'Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.'" This is a direct quotation of Psalm 31, verse 5.
The shift in tone here is really noticeable. In the fourth word, during the darkness, he cried out, my God," expressing that terrifying judicial separation. Now the darkness is lifted, the wrath is spent, the transaction of tetelestai is complete, the fellowship is restored, and he returns to the intimate familial address, Father.
This final word highlights the voluntary nature of his death. He doesn't simply bleed out helplessly until his body shuts down. Earlier in John's Gospel, Jesus explicitly stated, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord." The Greek phrasing used by the Gospel writers for "gave up his" spirit implies a conscious handing over or delivering up. Looking through Luke's lens, the perfect man models total, absolute trust in the Father at the threshold of death, yielding his spirit exactly when he chooses to.
The symphony of the seven words is incredibly deep. From initiating intercession and forgiveness to granting immediate salvation to the thief, establishing a new family unit, bearing the cosmic wrath of God, enduring extreme physical suffering, declaring the debt paid in full, and finally, voluntarily surrendering his spirit. But this brings us to one of the most mysterious and debated questions in our deep dive today. Jesus dies at 3 p.m. on Friday. He physically resurrects on Sunday morning. What happened between Friday afternoon and Sunday morning? Where did Jesus go?
This takes us into what theologians call the unseen battle. To understand where Jesus went, we have to establish the geography of the afterlife as it was understood in Second Temple Judaism prior to the resurrection. Jesus himself mapped this out for us in Luke 16 with the account of the rich man and Lazarus.
Right, the realm of the dead. In Hebrew, it's called Sheol, and in Greek, Hades.
Correct. And according to the historical and biblical framework, this realm had two distinct compartments separated by an impassable gulf. One side was a place of torment for the wicked. The other side was a place of comfort for the righteous, frequently referred to as Abraham's bosom or paradise.
So it was a waiting place. Because the theological understanding is that before Christ's actual sacrifice on the cross, the blood of bulls and goats in the Old Testament sacrificial system couldn't permanently remove sin. It only covered it temporarily. Therefore, the Old Testament saints figures like Abraham, David, Moses, Isaiah couldn't enter the full, unmediated presence of God in heaven yet. They were resting in paradise, waiting for the Messiah to finish the redemptive work.
Exactly. So when Jesus promises the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise," he is stating, "You are going with me to Abraham's bosom." But the New Testament epistles make it clear that Jesus didn't just go there to sleep. The apostles Peter and Paul describe a massive spiritual campaign. This event is traditionally known in church history as the harrowing of hell.
Let me clarify that for the listener, because hell usually brings up images of fire and eternal punishment.
Good clarification. In this context, hell is an older English translation referring to Hades, the general realm of the dead, not Gehenna, the eternal lake of fire.
Got it. So what did he do in Hades? 1 Peter 3:18 through 20 says, Jesus was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. He didn't go down there to suffer more. The suffering ended definitively with Tetelestai.
Precisely. He descended to proclaim absolute victory. The Apostle Paul writes in Colossians 2:15 that through the cross, God disarmed the principalities and powers, making a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them. Jesus enters the realm of the dead not as a captive, but as a conqueror, plundering Satan's domain.
And the climax of this descent is found in Ephesians 4:8 through 10. Paul quotes Psalm 68, saying that when Christ ascended on high, he led captivity captive. What does that mean practically for those Old Testament saints?
It means liberation. Jesus went into paradise, the waiting room of the righteous, and announced that the ultimate price had finally been paid. The blood of the true Lamb had been shed. He then liberated them, taking the captives of death and escorting them out of Hades and into the immediate, unmediated presence of the Father in the heavenly realm.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The theological literature often points to Psalm 24 as the prophetic liturgy of this exact moment of ascent. It is an incredible piece of poetry. The psalm cries out, "Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in." Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle.
Try to visualize the scene being described in the spiritual realm. The incarnate Son bearing the physical scars of the crucifixion, returning from the greatest battle in cosmic history, ascending to the gates of heaven. And he's not returning alone. He's leading a massive, triumphant procession of the redeemed Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, the prophets, and right there with them, the thief from the cross. He escorts them through the heavenly gates.
So the location of paradise essentially moves.
Theologically, yes. Because of the cross, paradise is no longer a waiting room in the subterranean realm of Hades. It is relocated to the very presence of God in heaven. This theological shift is why the Apostle Paul can later write with such confidence in 2 Corinthians 5 that for a believer to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. The waiting period is over.
And to solidify this victory, Jesus declares in Revelation 1:18, "I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades."
The metaphor of keys represents absolute authority. In the ancient world, the one holding the keys dictates who enters and who exits. The theological claim here is that death no longer has ultimate authority over humanity. Satan no longer holds the power of death as a weapon of terror. Jesus conquered the realm, walked into its domain, took the keys, and walked out. For the early church and for believers today, this completely neutralizes the existential fear of death. The transition from this life to the next is managed entirely by the one holding the keys, the one who has already paved the way.
This massive, unseen spiritual reality provides the necessary context to understand a deeply mysterious physical event recorded in Matthew's Gospel. We discussed the earthquake that happened when Jesus died, but Matthew 27:52 through 53 contains a detail that usually stops readers in their tracks. It says, "The tombs also were opened, And many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many.
It is undeniably one of the most extraordinary and debated passages in the Gospels. First, we must pay close attention to the chronology Matthew provides. The tombs break open at the exact moment of Jesus' death on Friday, when the earthquake hits. However, the text specifically notes that the saints do not actually come out of the tombs until after Jesus' resurrection on Sunday.
Why the delay? Why wait in an open tomb until Sunday?
Because of the theology of the first fruits. The Apostle Paul in Colossians 1:18 calls Jesus the firstborn from the dead. 1 Corinthians 15 says Christ is the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. The biblical protocol is that no human receives a glorified resurrection body before the author of life receives his. Jesus must be the first to defeat death.
To play devil's advocate here, a modern reader hears bodies coming out of tombs and walking into the city and immediately thinks of zombies. What exactly is Matthew describing here?
He is emphatically not describing zombies, nor is this just a temporary resuscitation like the story of Lazarus, who was brought back to mortal life only to die again later. The theological consensus is that these saints were raised in glorified supernatural bodies. Their appearance to many in Jerusalem served as a corporate, undeniable witness.
What is the primary theological message Matthew is trying to convey by including this?
It serves multiple purposes. First, it is a localized, physical preview of the final eschatological resurrection at the end of the age. Second, it is a tangible proof of what Jesus argued against the Sadducees earlier in Matthew 22. The Sadducees were the religious faction that strictly denied any concept of resurrection or the afterlife. Jesus told them, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. By physically raising these Old Testament saints and having them walk into the center of Jewish religion, God is providing walking, breathing proof that he is indeed the God of the living.
If we tie this back to the harrowing of hell we just discussed, the timing makes perfect sense. As Jesus leads captivity captive and brings the souls of the righteous into heaven, he allows a select group of them to manifest physically in Jerusalem. It acts as the ultimate apologetic sign to the Jewish nation that the Messianic age of resurrection had officially dawned.
Exactly. While all this cosmic and spiritual triumph is occurring back on the physical cross, the Roman soldiers are going about their grim bureaucratic duties. This brings us to the events of late Friday afternoon. It is the day of preparation, and the Jewish religious leaders are becoming extremely anxious because a high Sabbath is approaching at sundown.
The hypocrisy of the religious leaders here is truly astounding. The same men who just illegally conspired to murder an innocent man using false testimony are now deeply concerned about maintaining ceremonial Sabbath purity. Deuteronomy 21:22 states that a hanged man's body shouldn't remain on a tree overnight because it defiles the land. So they go to Pilate and ask him to perform crucifixion.
Crucifixion was the Roman practice of shattering the victim's legs with a heavy iron mallet. As we discussed regarding the physical mechanics of crucifixion, the victim had to push up on their nailed feet to draw breath. If the legs are shattered, they can no longer push up, and asphyxiation occurs within minutes. It was a brutal way to expedite death.
The soldiers break the legs of the two thieves, but when they get to Jesus, they find that he is already dead. He had yielded his spirit hours earlier with a cry of tetelestai. So instead of breaking his legs, a Roman soldier takes a heavy thrusting spear and drives it up into Jesus' side to confirm the kill. John's gospel records, with the precision of an eyewitness, that immediately there came out blood and water.
Modern medical analyses of this detail are fascinating. What does blood and water flowing from a chest wound indicate? Medically, it points to a condition known as pericardial effusion, or pleural effusion, which occurs during extreme trauma or cardiac rupture. A watery fluid builds up in the sac surrounding the heart and lungs, separating from the red blood cells.
So when the soldier's spear pierced the chest cavity, it punctured the lung and the heart, releasing this distinct, visible separation of blood and water.
Precisely. From an apologetic standpoint, it proves beyond a shadow of a medical doubt that Jesus was clinically fully dead. It thoroughly debunks later skeptical theories, like the swoon theory, which suggests Jesus merely passed out on the cross and later revived in the cool dampness of the tomb. The Roman spear made absolutely certain he was dead.
The medical proof is compelling, but the theological and prophetic typologies are even richer. John explicitly notes that Jesus' legs were not broken so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not a bone of his will be broken. That is a reference to Psalm 34:20, but it goes much deeper, back to the Passover instructions in Exodus 12.
We keep returning to the Passover because it is the fundamental framework for the crucifixion. God commanded Moses that when the Israelites prepared the Passover lamb, they were strictly forbidden from breaking any of its bones. The typology is perfect. The timing of the death, the use of the hyssop branch, and the unbroken bones. The Roman soldiers, acting out of pure, brutal military pragmatism, inadvertently fulfill the deepest, most sacred requirements of the Jewish Torah.
And what about the piercing itself? John points to Zechariah 12:10, a prophecy given over 500 years earlier, where God says, "They shall look on me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him."
That prophecy in Zechariah is one of the most profound in the Old Testament because of the speaker. God himself is speaking, and he says, "They will look on me whom they pierced." It's a stunning, ancient declaration of the incarnation, that the Almighty God would take on flesh and allow himself to be pierced by his own people. But the prophecy doesn't end in condemnation. It promises that this piercing will eventually bring about a spirit of grace and supplication, pointing forward to a future day of national repentance and spiritual cleansing for Israel. The wound inflicted in rejection becomes the very fountain of cleansing.
The intricate, interwoven connections of the narrative are incredible. The body is now dead, the prophecies of the bones and the spear are fulfilled. This brings us to the burial. The burial accounts across the Gospels introduce us to two wealthy, influential men who suddenly step out of the shadows, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus.
Both of these men were prominent members of the Sanhedrin, the very ruling council of 70 elders that had illegally convened to condemn Jesus. Up to this exact point, they were secret disciples. The texts note they kept their belief hidden for fear of the Jews. They were terrified of losing their social status, their lucrative careers, their political power, and potentially their lives.
This dynamic offers a deeply relevant psychological and social application for you, the modern listener. It is the universal battle of fear versus faith. It is easy for us to read the text and judge Joseph and Nicodemus for hiding their faith. But when you face massive cultural pressure, when your career is on the line, when your social standing could be obliterated by associating with the wrong person or idea, what do? Do you preserve your status, or do you stand publicly for what you believe is true?
What is deeply ironic and somewhat beautiful is the timing of their courage. The bold, outspoken disciples like Peter, who promised to die for Jesus, have completely fled in terror. It is these two secret, previously fearful politicians who finally find their courage in the darkest, most dangerous possible moment. When associating with Jesus means associating with a crucified enemy of the Roman state, Joseph goes directly to the Roman governor, Pilate, and formally requests the body. He risks everything.
They are granted the body. They take him down, wrap him in clean linen with the staggering 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes provided by Nicodemus, which is the amount of spices used for burying a king, and they lay him in Joseph's own brand new rock-hewn tomb. And once again, an ancient prophecy locks perfectly into place.
Isaiah 53:9 declared, "He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death." Think about the logistics of fulfilling that. He was executed between two thieves, assigned a grave with the wicked, likely meant for a communal criminal pit. But because of this sudden, highly specific intervention by a wealthy secret disciple, he is buried in a rich man's tomb. The prophetic precision requires a wealthy, influential disciple to find his courage at the exact right hour to fulfill a 700-year-old text.
There is also a profound theological metaphor embedded in the concept of Christ's burial. Under normal circumstances, when someone dies, they are placed in the earth and the dirt covers them. But the theological framework here posits that Jesus took the sins of humanity upon himself. Therefore, his burial effectively covered sin, removing it from sight.
Let's expand on that by looking at the Old Covenant purity laws. Under the law of Moses, if a person touched a dead body or a leper, that person became ceremonially unclean. The corruption transferred to the living person. But the Gospels consistently show Jesus reversing this flow. When Jesus touched a leper, the leper didn't make Jesus unclean. Jesus' purity made the leper clean. When he touched a dead body, the dead came back to life. His inherent righteousness swallowed up the corruption.
So how does that apply to the tomb?
While he was wrapped in linen and laid in a stone tomb, the theological claim is that death could not hold him or corrupt him because he possessed an intrinsic, incorruptible righteousness. The burial is not just a disposal of a body. It is the final planting of the seed that will conquer the grave from the inside out.
And there were dedicated witnesses to this burial. The women, specifically Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph, followed Joseph and watched closely where the body was laid. The pastoral commentary on this highlights a beautiful insight regarding the concept of care.
Yes. Human nature often defaults to fear or paralysis in the face of tragedy. Sometimes people chalk their inaction up to procrastination or shock, But frequently, inaction is simply a lack of deep care. We make time for and we stay present for what we truly value.
These women stayed through the horror of the crucifixion, the terrifying darkness, the earthquake, and the grueling process of the burial. They sat opposite the tomb as the massive stone was rolled across the entrance. Why? Because their value of Jesus transcended their fear. The rhythms of their devotion and their love didn't stop just because the worst possible tragedy had struck. It's a profound lesson in loyalty.
While the women are acting out of deep, courageous love, the enemies of Jesus are acting out of deep, paranoid fear. Which brings us to the final historical element of Friday and Saturday. Matthew 27:62 through 66, the account of the temple guards securing the tomb.
The situational irony here is almost comedic. It's Saturday, the day after the crucifixion. The chief priests and Pharisees go to Pilate. They say, "Sir, we remember what that deceiver said while he was still alive. After 3 days, I will rise again." The enemies of Jesus actually remembered his prophecy better than his own followers did. The disciples are hiding in locked rooms, convinced it's all over, while the Pharisees are terrified that he might have been telling the truth.
Their paranoia drives them to ask Pilate to secure the tomb until the third day. Their stated rationale is that they fear the disciples will steal the body and fake a resurrection. Pilate, likely annoyed by them at this point, tells them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it as secure as you can." So they go, seal the stone, and post a heavily armed guard.
Let's look at the apologetic value of this moment. The religious leaders, in their frantic attempt to prevent any rumors of a resurrection, actually provide the most undeniable historical proof for it.
They absolutely do. They utilized a Roman seal, which involved stretching a cord across the stone and stamping it with official Roman wax. Breaking that seal was a capital offense against the Roman Empire. It invited the full wrath of Caesar. Furthermore, they post a guard of highly trained soldiers. These men faced brutal execution themselves if they fell asleep on duty or abandoned their post.
So by trying to lock the story down, they inadvertently created a scenario where no future skeptic could ever credibly claim that a group of terrified, unarmed fishermen snuck past elite guards, quietly rolled a multi-ton stone away, and stole a corpse. The enemies of Jesus locked down the tomb with the maximum security apparatus of the ancient world.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it sets the stakes perfectly for the ultimate demonstration of divine power. They attempted to use the absolute authority and military might of the Roman Empire to keep the author of life sealed in a grave. But the overarching theme of the biblical narrative is that human efforts to suppress God's power only serve to amplify its ultimate revelation.
We've covered an immense amount of historical, linguistic, and theological ground today. We've examined the cosmic upheaval, the profound depths of the 7 words, the harrowing of hell, the physical and prophetic proofs of the pierced side, the courage of the burial, and the irony of the guards. As we wrap up, we need to synthesize what all of this means. The crucifixion narrative is, at its core, a masterclass on the anatomy of human sin.
It is the ultimate mirror held up to humanity. Every conceivable dimension of human failure and sin is on display at Golgotha. We see the religious pride, envy, and hypocrisy of the Pharisees, who orchestrate a murder but refuse to enter Pilate's hall so they can remain ceremonially clean. We see the greed and betrayal of Judas. We see the political cowardice of Pilate, who recognizes the truth, washes his hands of it, but still condemns an innocent man to keep the peace. We see the casual, brutal cruelty of the soldiers gambling over a dying man's clothes. And we see the fickle mockery of the crowds.
So what does this all mean for you? The central message of the gospel is how all of that overwhelming sin is dealt with. We discussed the concept of penal substitution earlier. Jesus absorbs the wrath that all of that collective human sin deserved. Because of that sacrifice, the veil is torn, granting humanity direct access to the divine. The strong man's house, Satan's domain of death, is plundered, and his captives are set free.
As we noted from Colossians 2, the unseen spiritual reality of the cross was a total victory. While human eyes saw the tragic, bloody execution of a ruined man, the spiritual realm witnessed a conquering king systematically stripping the enemy of his ultimate weapons: accusation, condemnation, and the fear of death.
For you listening today, the encouragement drawn from this narrative is foundational. It means you can rest in the reality of tetelestai. The theological framework asserts that your salvation is not based on your religious performance, your moral perfection, or your ability to never make a mistake. It is based entirely on Christ's finished work.
Furthermore, the cross provides a practical blueprint for human living. It teaches radical forgiveness, modeled by Jesus forgiving his executioners. It emphasizes the importance of familial care, even in our darkest moments. And psychologically, it offers immense comfort in the face of physical and emotional suffering, knowing that the God of the biblical narrative has personally experienced the absolute depths of pain, betrayal, and abandonment.
However, the historical texts also contain a solemn warning. The cross is not presented as a piece of neutral history that you can simply observe and walk away from. The author of Hebrews, in chapter 10, issues a severe warning about the expectation of judgment for anyone who tramples the Son of God underfoot and treats the blood of the covenant as an unholy thing. The narrative demands a verdict.
Pilate tried to wash his hands and stay neutral. The text suggests you cannot remain neutral. The mockers scoffed, and the religious leaders tried to bury the truth under a sealed rock. Every reader is forced to decide what they will do with the claims of the king, the servant, the perfect man, and the divine son. The interaction with the thief on the cross stands as the ultimate invitation. No matter how far gone a person thinks they are, a genuine turn of faith is enough. But the choice must be made.
We want to thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive into these profound sources. We've journeyed through the darkest, most pivotal hours of history. We've witnessed the earth-shattering power of the king, the agonizing endurance of the servant, the flawless compassion of the perfect man, and the sovereign control of the divine son. But remember, the historical narrative pauses right here, in the quiet, dark cold of a guarded, sealed tomb.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over this week as you process all of this. The enemies of Jesus utilized the political authority and military might of the most powerful empire on earth to seal a stone and post a guard. Their goal was to keep the author of life dead and buried. But ask yourself this: when Sunday morning comes, what happens when the wax seal of Rome comes face to face with the breath of the Creator?
That is a powerful question to end on. Keep exploring these texts, keep asking the deep questions, and carry the profound weight of this deep dive into your week. We'll see you next time.